What does South London, X-Men, A Prophet, and BMF have in common? Well, let's talk about it. Hey everyone, this is D, Movieman, fellow cinephile, popcorn addict, and emerging film critic, coming to you with reliable recaps, reviews, and reactions. And today, I am coming to you all with my thoughts on a very special new series that is none other than Supacell. Super-duper-cell. I can't stand the... Listen, if you know the reference, then you know the reference. If you don't, well, you better ask somebody. Created, written, and co-directed by Rapman, and starring Tosin Cole, Adedayo Adedayo, Nadine Mills, Eric Kofi Abrefa, and many more. Story-wise, the series is centered around a group of 5 seemingly ordinary black citizens from South London. This group is also unified by a complicated medical history, which in turn causes them to unexpectedly develop superpowers. However, extraordinary circumstances will soon force them to band together as they face perilous and mysterious threats in both the present and the future. So I'm going to start with the pros, and let me say, I just may as well get it out the way. But considering everything that I said in my review of the American Society of Magical Negroes, well, this is what I'm talking about. Because if you're going to incorporate black people with some semblance of magical powers or superpowers, of course, superpowers in this instance, but if we're going to have abilities, if it's going to be something where we are able to step out and command this very unique, supernatural, innate strength and manifesting that in powers of some sort, then this is how you do it, okay? The American Society of Magical Negroes could not be farther away from this project. And for many reasons, I am very, very grateful for that. So with that being said, I am naturally always here and I'm always intrigued by stories and narratives that involve unexpected powers and abilities and them coming forth pretty much out of nowhere. And then how the people in turn who receive said powers have to adjust and deal with that. Now, of course, my introduction to this concept was through X-Men, the animated series, and Batman, the animated series. But even getting outside the world of superheroes, there were plenty of films throughout the years, and especially in the 90s, that I would watch, like The Mask, Powder, Matilda, and the list goes on. It just was always something so intriguing and just interesting. It's like, how does one navigate the world when you suddenly have these abilities that are not human, you know? And it suddenly makes you superhuman, or it gives you a perspective of the world, a perspective of life that no one else understands. And so I've always found that to be something that provides a very compelling narrative. I would also say immediately, given the tone and the direction and the style of this, it was absolutely giving me Project Power from Netflix back in 2020. And I use that as a more recent example, and more so because it takes a very grounded, very gritty, in-your-face approach to abilities, powers, and how it can affect everyday people. And how, especially in the black community, shall we say, or some might say urban, I'm not even going to go there, but how some might say that would manifest itself. What would that suddenly look like? And of course, using and having South London as a backdrop, we get that in another very unique way. Now, as I mentioned before, this series was created by Rapman. He is a British rapper, record producer, screenwriter, and film director. He actually made his writing and directorial debut with the film Blue Story back in 2019, which is an adaptation of the YouTube series of the same name, which in and of itself is based on the real-life gangs in South London known as the Peckham Boys and the Ghetto Boys. And he'll also be directing the film American Son, starring Stephen James and Russell Crowe, which is also a remake to the French film Un Prophète from 2009. And for very obvious reasons, you can see that influence here. We do have a very significant part of the story that deals with South London and the gang culture that is prevalent there. And granted, I'm not from South London, but I've seen and I've become very aware of that element and how that has shown up and how that is something that definitely has been brought to my attention. And even regarding one of my friends who was a director, who was a British director, he actually had a film that I did a review for. It dealt with the idea of someone being young and impressionable becoming influenced by the allure of gangs and the gang culture and how that then has an impact on his life. So I would say that although it was kind of tough to watch, it was definitely a darker, in-your-face element of the story. It was very interesting to see Rapman's influence as far as incorporating that story, especially in regards to Tazer. I'll have more thoughts to share on Tazer later, but I do think it was interesting to introduce an element of the story that had to deal with complicated morality or diminished morality. maybe I should say that instead. The contrast of the grittiness and the reality of gang wars, gang culture, and then this other supernatural superhero element that's happening and how those things clash. I thought that was interesting. Like, that's such a different take. And so I have to say that although I wasn't expecting it, that is a piece of the story that I actually found very compelling. Worrisome, of course, but definitely compelling. I also thought another piece of the story that made this interesting was the medical history. Now, I'm not going to spoil what that is, but I think once they delve into what ends up causing these powers and what kind of community reckons with that particular medical history and medical complication, I was like, wow, it's another really interesting way to bring that to the forefront. It's not just I fell into a chemical plant or I got bit by some kind of radioactive bug. You know what I'm saying? Like, this was a different way to bring that aspect of the story forward, and I thought it was something that was very unique and very interesting as well. I will also say that it helps to have very impressive actors and a fairly solid ensemble cast in place, helping to make this story work, helping to make it all the more effective. And I can definitely say that about all the actors we have here. And of course, as I always say, I love the fact that for some, and granted, I'm only American, right? So I can't speak for who may be more well known. Definitely these are up and comers for me. And what was also nice is realizing, which is always fun, that I already was familiar with a couple of them. Specifically, Eric Kofi Abrefa, I was already familiar with him for his rather disturbing role in BMF. That is not a series I watch, but I've seen clips, and yeah, that role is a far cry from what he's doing here. So it was great to see the range. And he also popped up in the Book of Clarence as Jedediah the Terrible. This is also an actor that starred in Rapman's Blue Story, the film that I mentioned earlier. So having that connection to Rapman's work was great. And I was also familiar with Tosin Cole. Now, I haven't actually seen the projects that he has starred in, but I recognize his face again from clips, from trailers, just seeing his face in passing. And he starred in films like Till, Bob Marley, One Love, and he also starred in the Doctor Who series. Now, he also was one of the main stars of House Party, but the less said about that, the better. And I will also say, although I will have additional thoughts on this, I thought in and of itself, the series did a good job of introducing the story and providing just enough within the amount of episodes that we had. It was very short and sweet, which worked in a way, and maybe not so much in another way. So with that being said, moving over to the cons, the obvious con, of course, is that this was only 6 episodes. Now, again, I do think there's something to be said about having a series that is short and sweet, and I kind of would rather have something that can tell the story effectively in a short runtime. But since we're also just getting started, it's just kind of like, before we really like dive in, it's already over. And since we know how the streaming audience is, and it's such a dicey thing because I understand that when you see something good, you're already ready for the next season, right? And I just think there's something about the way streaming works. And I won't deny that it works for cable or, normal television and the way that that works. But I just think with streaming, I just think people are already ready. You binge, and then people are already ready in a couple of weeks for the next season. And I think people don't always give the grace or the understanding for how production works. And we are just coming off of a strike as well. So, I understand production on the one end, but there can be a really ridiculous amount of time in between seasons. So if you leave us off wanting more, that could be a good thing, but you also got to keep the ball rolling. So I really hope that as we move into season 2, that we don't lose the momentum from one season to the next, because you already know. And just to use an example of another popular Black series, P-Valley, the people are over it. So I really hope that doesn't happen to this series, okay? So Rapman, if you're paying attention, the people are ready. So let's get it moving. I would also say something I was a little bit mixed on was the actual piece involving the powers, the physical manifestation of the powers, or how some of the characters reacted to having the powers. And I'm not gonna lie, that opening scene at the beginning where you got the character, I was just like, oh, don't do this. I'm sorry. I'm like, don't do this. I get it, but it's a little too cheesy. It's a little too corny. When characters do this I'm like, no, stop it right now. Like, I get it. You want to make it clear that it requires some effort and some energy to bring this, this energy, this power forth. But sometimes the way that is done can just be very goofy. I'm sorry to say that. And then my final cons concern 2 characters. The first is Tazer. Now, what I mentioned about Tazer earlier, this is where this circles around here, because I liked that Tazer was a character with conflicted morality. Like, you can see on the one hand, he wants to be one type of person, but he's been so ingrained in this world and in this culture that he reflects all of the terrible aspects of it, right? And even when you think he's about to make the right decision, it's like, no, we're just going further down the wrong path. And I think that's okay. And I am someone who also appreciates unlikable characters, or characters who are just not morally upright, because that can sometimes be, especially for me, I think that can be way more compelling than a character that is just good and positive and reflects everything that is honorable. The whole Batman versus Superman. So in keeping with that, I understand what Tazer is supposed to represent in this story. And I know that in the next season, I think we'll see the evolution of his character. But it's a little tough to identify with a character who does some of the things that he does. I get it, but it was like, all right, dude, like, chill out. Can you, like, dial it back? I was just like, it was a couple moments I was just like, you know what? I can't really be mad if you get stomped out. If you get curb stomped, if you get whooped, because you are doing a lot. I understand your motivation, but please. I'm tired. And the second character concerns Dionne. Now, I liked Dionne for the most part. I liked her relationship with Michael, and I think that Dionne was a character I really appreciated as well. She just seemed very smart, very resourceful, and that she was doing her best to make sense of all this all this foolery, shenanigans, and bedlam going on, right? That being said, I didn't appreciate what the writers did with her character in that last episode. It's just like, look, I've said it before, but there has to be a way, especially in horror films, because Lord, but there has to be a way to have characters end up in dire circumstances or end up in peril in the midst of danger without dumbing them down. And to me, I felt like how the writers had Dionne acting in that last episode went completely against everything her character had displayed up until then. You cannot tell me that in that scenario that Dionne or anybody with a rational mind would have done the things that she did. And I was just like, I understand what you are wanting to happen. I understand what needs to happen. But we can still get there and have a character, because to me, and I've also said this with horror films as an example, I think the most tragic thing and the scariest thing is when you make all the preparations and you do all the right things and you still end up in the midst of disaster. You still end up, in the worst possible position. And I think that's what you have to lean into. Don't have characters doing dumb things and things that don't make sense. And then it's just like, oh no, how did that happen? You know why it happened. Stop it. Stop it right now. So with all that being said, I'm going to give Supacell a B+. I have to say this was a really enjoyable time. It was fun, it was compelling, it was interesting, and I mean, this isn't something I had to mention, but it also helps to have a story and a narrative in a series like this that is centered around characters that are blackety, blackety, black. Okay?
Black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, and I'm black, y'all.
And I'm always going to be here for that, and it's not going to change. So I am just looking forward to what's coming next with this series, because I love everything that was teased. I loved everything that, we can expect and hope for. And I just hope that anything that wasn't, in place, outside of, maybe some minor criticisms, because nothing I said really took away from the series, but if we're going to be real, then I just had to, of course, comment and give my thoughts on those things. But yeah, Rapman has created a very interesting world here. And so I hope that, like I said, that given everyone's anticipation and excitement, that we can find a way to keep the ball rolling and see the continuation of this story, because this is such a great start, and I trust that it will only get better from here. Supacell, Super Duper Cell, is now streaming on Netflix. You guys feel free to check it out, leave your thoughts below, and let me know what you think. So, once again, this is D, Movieman, signing off, and I'll see you at the movies.